And the principal has to answer to the school superintendent over the whole county. And then the superintendent has to answer to the school board in that county. And then then the school board has to rule in such a way that it don't conflict with other rules in the state. So I've been in a position of authority, and if you think back, I bet you have been in the same situation. If you are a foreman or floor lady, if it's female, in a factory, you may have a certain part of that factory that you're responsible for, and there may be 10 people involved. And so while you are there, then they are subject to you. So, and then the plant usually has a superintendent, and everything finally gets back to him. So we are to obey the authorities that we are under. And certainly that goes to our relationship with God. He is the authority in all things. And so we're continuously subject to God and what He has told us in the Word. Now, if we go over to Romans, I'm going the wrong way. Romans 13, it has a lot to tell us about the authorities. And let us remember this, regardless of what government does, God sanctions authority. God sanctions the authority that we have in our lives. So in Romans 8, let's look at that for just a moment. Well, maybe it's 13. I bet some of you are already there. It says in this first verse of chapter 13, let every soul be subject to the governing authority. So in this county, we have to be subject to the authority. And who is that? Well, each town has a mayor that is supposed to be the authority in that town. Then, of course, in a state, the governor is the authority in that state. Then, of course, we'll have another authority over the United States. But Paul is telling us, and I think he's probably referring to people who would own slaves, talking to them about obey the authority. And I think it's largely in that realm that he's talking about it, by the authority. But we know what authority is today. And this thing of the major authority is that God sanctions government. God was wise enough to know that we have to have a control of the people. If it don't, we'll have a country that's in chaos, total chaos. Now that does not mean that God agrees with every rule or law that in our state, the governor and the Senate and the House in Washington does not agree with everything, every law they make. But in spite of that, God had wisdom enough to know that we have to have authority. We have to have control. Just like in a household, the authority in the household is the parents in that household. And the kids in that household are to be subject to their parents. So there may be rules in that household that you wouldn't want in your household, but every household has to have the house rule. And the children in that home are then subject to the parents in that house. So it says, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities. Now, it was carried on obviously different 2,000 years ago. But the Bible is written in such a way that it can be carried to up to today and still be up to date. It says that there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed. Notice this now, are appointed by God. How could that be when we vote on our authorities, don't we? You know, we go out and we vote for a governor of a state. Well, what that means is that God sanctions that. Yes. Yeah, well, that was a big problem during that war, that we had northern Christians killing southern Christians and vice versa. And that's wrong in the sight of God, to kill each other. So back to what Larry said, is it right or wrong? But as I said, God doesn't agree with every rule that's made in government, but on the overall outlook, then we still have to have government. You know, it's like seat belts in a automobile. Most of us were raised when there weren't any seat belts. I remember I had a Chevrolet, I think it was, that didn't have any seat belts. So you could go out and buy the seat belts and, you know, put them in yourself. But now it's a law. No car can be on the road without seat belts. And if you're caught not wearing one, then you have to pay the price. But what I was going to say was, seat belts can hurt you, and hurt you bad. People have received bad injuries because of having a seat belt on. Well, just look at the times, though, that people have had a front-end collision and they're still sitting in their seat rather than being thrown through the windshield. So there's more good that comes from seat belts than there is bad, in spite of the fact that seat belts will hurt you. So it's talking about the being subject to authorities. None of us, I don't believe, enjoy wearing a seatbelt. But we know that for our own safety, they're good things to have on. Because there's been people before seatbelts who have had those collisions and go through the windshield and all kinds of bad things. Yes? Probably, yeah. Right. Yeah, yeah. So we can't say, well, I'm not going to wear a seatbelt. Those things can hurt you. Well, what's the alternative? Don't wear them, have a front end collision, and get cut up going through the windshield. You know, so we choose then to wear seatbelts because of that. Because the authorities have said, you must do this. If you don't, you have to pay the price. But I remember not having seat belts, and my daughters would stand beside of me when I was driving and just didn't think one thing about it. But if we'd had a collision, it might have killed us both. Now, of course, all the children have to be buckled in, and I think it's a good thing because it saves a lot of hurt and injuries and even life. So we are to be subject to that. And the authorities that exist are appointed of God. That means that whoever we appoint, then if they don't rule in such a way that goes against what the Bible teaches, then we are to obey that. We don't like to pay taxes, do we? And we think sometimes, well, where's all my tax money going? Well, it goes into a lot of it. When you give it up, it just goes like this. And the government in the state or the United States is to make sure it goes into places where it's the most good for the people. Not the higher ups, but for the people. And obviously we know that don't happen a lot of times. But in spite of all of that, God sanctions government. We have to have it. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists the ordinance of God. So that's something to think about. And again, I think it's largely referring to slaves who are under owners, but it involves everything else.